you guys asked Leading Practice to undertake an analysis of your digital workplace. And you wanted us to better assist your understanding of how standards or how you could use standards to help integrate and align your digital workforce or digital workplace. And I'll address this, and I know this is repetitive because you've seen it 18 or 19 times so far. I'll address it through our analytical approach, the complication, the resolution, and some conclusion and takeaway. And again, my specific focus area, which is the last of the group, is digital media workplace. So our analytical approach. To answer your question, our team was about 19. Sometimes it was 20, sometimes it was 19, sometimes it was 21, depending on who we brought in at what point for specialties. From Leading Practice, and we undertook a set of analytical processes to find some similarities, differences between approximately 1,900 items that you gave us to focus on within your workplace to gain a better understanding. And again, here's an example. I mean, here are the 19 of us. Mine is down there at the bottom. I'm digital media workplace. And with that, we'll go ahead and continue. So again, I had approximately 100 objects ranging from things like the internet to the Internet of Things to collaborative work, diversified networks, distributed databases, information systems. And we started by categorizing all of these objects, all of these areas into lead object groups in the various layers, identifying some new relationships. And I'll show you some of that. So on the left of the screen, you see where we just started from. Here are the 100 objects or areas, because not all of them were individual objects, some were focus areas. And then you see the yellow arrow to the right, and what that did was that took and we applied all of the lead objects, all of the meta object areas. And down here at the bottom is a small little shot of the 91 focus areas of R and the different objects within our periodic table, or what we call the building blocks for your analysis. And this is just one, which was how the internet was determined to be a portfolio, and it maps to the portfolio object area. And so once we did this and we applied some new relationships here to figure out if there's some new ideas, new analysis, new processes, new thoughts, we look at the bigger picture here when we're applying the 91 class types, is we then documented them through a more detailed mapping of these objects. We decompose them, or we broke them down into classes and stereotypes and types and subtypes and subtypes, depending on what the depth was we needed to go. And that's what I'll show you next. Again, we'll show the flow. We went from the object areas to assigning lead objects to now we are applying decomposition principles, and we did our decomposition map, and we applied all of these things, and we broke them down into specific instances, whether they were in the business area, the business layer, or the information layer, or the technology layer. And there are sub-layers within those, being platform and infrastructure, application and data, and value and business service. And I know you've heard all this before, so this is just an example of what we did for the digital media as well. Now, as we continue to do this, we ran into some complications, some things we saw. There are many differences to how the silos within your company look and focus on their efforts. So that created some gaps and some needs to what we have identified. There's a need for you to, as an organization, to better organize your items and your objects to better represent the data and information that you're trying to convey. There's also a gap in understanding of your organizational processes, focus areas, and again, of the data and information you have available. What I also found was conducting just a current one-to-one relationship analysis between items or objects and capabilities is not a clear process that will enable the productization of your workplace. So we need to have a greater analysis to look at that. And I've got some ideas and what we did and how to resolve some of this. So if we continue to employ leading practices, maps, their matrix, and their models to categorize and visualize your digital media workplace element, is the objects. So by using other things as well was how do standards work? And by using the standards-based objects, it helps us better visualize and understand. So we also think that using a scenario-based matrix in modeling will enable better discussions on process alignment and integration within the company. And with and in the various layers, being the business, the information, the technology layers, and their sub-layers will also, by providing that structure, help you have a better understanding. Applying lead standards-based objects, as I talked about a second ago, will help identify the similarities, differences in your productization scenarios that we just talked about. And we're going to show you some examples of those. And this will help your decision-making process. You know, productization can be delivered from identifying, visualizing, and managing a set of objects as a product. It's a new way of looking at it and thinking about it, but you've got to have a standards-based approach and philosophy and methodology using maps and matrices and models to help with this process, because it's not necessarily just viewing objects and their relationships to another. It's about looking at them differently with different relationships. So let's look at that a little bit. So we did some scenarios. So for scenario one, we a directive from the CEO. The marketing directorate is going to then use some cooperative communication, develop a new image catalog, a services catalog within 48 hours to demonstrate how you're going to continue exceeding industry imagery standards, quality standards. And the things in yellow here are other object areas that needed to be added to my scenario to better round out the whole process. Now, sometimes I was able to use objects that the other 18 analysts used, and sometimes I had to create new objects. And so we took these, and the ones that are not were within my categorization, and when I decomposed everything, these were objects that were already within my decomposition map. So let's map this. So as we took the scenario, so the extended sequence model, which really is about the collaboration and the processes within this, and there are many modeling techniques. We used the extended sequence model for this particular version to show the different variances here. And so we start again with the CEO on the left-hand side. He's got a force and a driver, or he's got a force there, or driver, and he's going to give a directive. And so you got an information flow there. And then it goes to the marketing directorate. Some difference there. Objectives that were derived from all these other pieces, and then they start the request process. And you can see the lines going back and forth where we've got data going from instant messaging. Well, instant messaging there's a risk when we're talking about different information flow. So then we applied a risk to it. And then there's information or data going back. The dotted line is actual data going back to the original process. And then we need more information or more data. So then we go back and forth, and then back and forth, back and forth. So this is just one example of the model. And so we can further do analysis on this. And when we link these to the other models, it then makes things a clearer picture and gives you a better idea. So let's go to Our second scenario, which was the chief financial officer, wants to use some collaborative work to identify, and it's going to take about 30 days to figure out if we've got any redundancies here so we can do some cost cutting. And again, the same process. I've got additional things I had to add. Added a redundancy functions report, which was the outcome of this that will help us with reduce cost. Here's the model. Same thing, a little bit different. So you got the chief financial officer who's providing a driver, who's given a new requirement to the financial directorate. Now there's some more players. We had to go to program managers and service managers, and there was a greater security risk this time because now we were dealing with financial data, so we needed to ensure that we were doing identity management and ensuring nobody outside of the who needed to know had access to the information. So again, we had some instant messaging, but because we did the identity management, we were able to mitigate some of those risks that we had on the last one. We had some different platforms, and we had some unique things here that we found. And so down here, as you look at this last send and receive, there was a combination because we were using distributed platforms and distributed databases that asked data at the same time from the same distributed databases. So we had to play around a little bit and use this a little bit more to end up with the final report going back to the CEO on here was your redundant functions. Well, this led us to our third scenario, which is based on the two previous scenarios and the results of those two reports. There was a new strategy that was developed to do some training and cross-leveling to facilitate cost cutting. And so this added an additional set of complexity here, and we had a training strategy, but we had to add a certification to make sure that everybody was qualified. We had to do a new plan. We had to add some other standards in there as well, some other measurements in. So let's look at that model. So this is a little bit hard to see, but I'll show you the detailed part of it in just a second. So you take the first model up here. So we left that in there, and so the outcome of that was a report. And the outcome of the second model was a report. And the CFO and the CEO physically handed the reports to each other. So it was a different line there. Well, that led to this new scenario. And then you had the information flows, which are the yellow, that go between those two that come out and they bring out the third scenario. So I'm going to a little bit detailed view of the more details of the third. And this was the training scenario. We had a lot more bodies involved. We had a lot more people, actors there. We had some validators. We had different directorates. And you'll notice that the CFO and the CEO were brought in as individuals because they talked, and as we talked about it, this new scenario, they were going to lead by example. And so they were going to take the same repetitive training because that's, one of the keys to getting the workforce to actually do what needs to be done is demonstrate and lead by example. So we had some of the social or the messaging. We had some security things because we had financial reports up here. And then we had the training structure down here. And there was some individual data passing back and forth at a lower level. We had a certification process where we were double checking the data and certifying it back to the lead trainer. We were using the distributed and double checking the time. And so we had process flow back into this way and request. And then the final verification of training certification that goes back. And then what we ended up with was a new enterprise service within the time zone that we were looking for. So what do all these things show you? Well, you asked us to look at this and how can lead standards help? Well, when you model each of your scenarios to standards-based objects and the different layers, it gives you the similarities and differences to help your overall decision-making process. You can greater understand your digital media workplace based off of new relationships to a standard objects, as well identify business, the information, the technology, or sublayers that are aligned to lead enterprise and industry standards. These will help you mitigate the gaps we identified and reduce the complexity, position you to be a workplace outperformer if you apply these functionalities as you move forward. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to open it up for questions.